Well, Nathan, welcome to episode 7 of the CEO Under 30 podcast. For those who don't know Nathan Schweid, he's the owner of the Junk Trunk. He's scaled this business over the last,
9 years.
not 9 years to a 7-figure company with 15 employees and almost 100 roll-off dumpsters now. Um, Incredible accomplishment, man. I'm looking forward to learning from you today, and let's get into it.
Yeah. No, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Can share a little bit about how I got started in the trash and waste space. I was a junior at CU Boulder, and a bunch of friends of mine were getting ready to go on a post-grad trip to Southeast Asia, and I really wanted to be along for the ride. My parents were not thrilled about the idea of paying for it, and pretty much were like, figure it out on your own. So, desperation is oftentimes a great motivator. And I kind of started finding odd jobs on Craigslist, moving jobs, landscaping jobs, and quickly saw that there was a big need, to haul things away at the end of projects like that. I saw it as, a really simple, easy way to make a bargain, with a customer. Hey, I'll haul this away for $100, stuff like that. And had a pickup truck, had access to a pickup truck for my dad. The rest is kind of history. I built up a clientele, saved up enough money the few months leading up to the trip to go. And, when I got back, just stuck with it and, was super excited by it. I was a shitty student in college. Didn't take school very seriously, really ever throughout my schooling, and was really, excited and just overall motivated and inspired to, find something that, I saw was productive and beneficial, felt great to make some money.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the high level of, me getting started in the junk space.
Yeah. Before all of that, what was life like? Like, was entrepreneurship ever a thing that you thought you would do growing up, through high school or, you know, um, previously?
Yeah, I was always super intrigued by it. My dad's a lifelong entrepreneur. He's owned several businesses. Uh, so I always saw that hustle and that side of him from him. Which excited me. I wasn't like I, I wasn't sure. I was really into sports in middle and high school. Had aspirations to play in college, and
What sports did you play?
I played football. That was my main sport.
Yeah.
Ended up getting injured my senior year of high school, so a relatively severe injury. So that kind of tabled all those aspirations, and that was really a tough, rocky point for me. I had all my friends getting ready to go off to big universities throughout the country, and I was pretty unsure of what I was going to do. My grades sucked. I didn't know if I was going to even get into the big state schools. And actually, initially ended up at Metro for my first year, and then ultimately transferred to CU after a year at Metro. But yeah, I would say seeing my dad's entrepreneurial hustle, had always had it in the back of my mind that I was going to work for myself.
Yeah. Do you feel like sports helped you a lot with your business as well? Because, like for me, I grew up wrestling, and wrestling's a very discipline heavy sport. Everything from cutting weight to how you train, the fact that it's like one-on-one between another individual, and there's nobody else you can put blame on if you lose a wrestling match.
Yeah.
So it's really helped shifted the way that I do business. Would you say that sports growing up really helped you?
Yeah, it's I still love sports today, and I always almost subconsciously find myself reverting back to thinking through that lens of the team element. Now I've managed employees. We've been a team of 35, 40 employees at one time. So it's approaching your management style, less so as a manager and, kind of more so as a coach.
Mhm.
I really try and look at it that way, especially with where our business is today, with our general manager in particular. We're asking a lot of him, and he's a, really unique personality. Um, Great dude, been with us for a long time now, but, I look at our relationship as, it's teammates.
Mm.
We both want the same outcome. Um, but I'm coaching. That's a fun aspect for me. And like in the NFL, we've got those like modern offensive minds like Sean McVay, Ben Johnson, uh, and how am I incorporating like those new school techniques with like, the more like rugged old school guys like the Harbaughs, and incorporating both of those,
Yeah.
kind of elements is a fun way that I try and, look at it as I'm running my business.
Yeah. It's a cool perspective because I feel like a lot of times there's a negative connotation with like a boss. A lot of people don't like a a boss, but they like a leader. And if you can, a coach is really just somebody that's leading the team in the right direction. The team still has to do the work. A coach can't win a game for the team, but he can really lead them in the right direction and help see where those holes are in the game. So I like that you use that perspective.
Yeah.
Talk to me about you started it in your dad's pickup truck. Where did it go from there?
Yeah. I mean, it's been a journey. There's no doubt.
Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of times too, when you've been in business for a little while, 9 years,
Yeah.
it can all kind of blend together. Um, but try to take me through like that first year, 2 years. What did that look like for you?
Yeah. So, it was a lot of just me on the truck. So, like the classic junk removal, um, approached, to the businesses, two or three guys in a box truck going around and hauling mattresses, furniture, yard waste, construction debris, and charging, based off, how many pickup truck loads it is. But those first couple years, it was really me. And then, I would kind of haggle friends, to come help me out, on bigger jobs when I needed it. Uh, which, slowly but surely I stopped, having friends on the truck with me.
Hmm.
um, I was pulling guys from the fraternity house to come haul trash, which is fun, in the moment, but not always the most reliable
Yeah.
way to get your team to show up on time. Um, but it was me. It was college buddies. Quickly, not quickly, probably, after about 8-10 months, hired my first like full-time W-2 guy, driver. You know, then there was a second, and there was a third. Saved up enough money, had help from my dad
Mhm.
to scale to get a more legit truck. Got a dump truck, after starting with the pickup truck, and then you know after about a year and a half, 2 years, had our second truck.
Mm.
And the junk removal space, and we can, get into this, has really, transformed from where it was in 2016, 2017
Mm.
to where it is now. And which is kind of why we're angling so heavily into dumpsters now. Still doing junk removal, still, a part of our business, but with social media, um, it's funny. There's a huge junk removal YouTube community.
Hmm.
Um, it's a really low barrier to entry
Mm.
industry. All you need is a pickup truck,
Yeah.
and to outbid, the bigger guys, which, fortunately, we ended up becoming, and in the metro area, in particular in Denver, we had like 5-6 junk removal trucks at our peak in Denver.
Mm.
Just in junk removal, we were doing, about 1.2, to 1.5 million. at our peak for junk. But as time's gone on, there's when I first started, there was probably 20, you know, junk removal companies in Denver in total. Between the franchises,
Mm.
the smaller mom and pops, the middle tier local guys like I would consider us to be. There's literally probably 200 now.
Wow.
Um, and that's not even including the guys that go on Facebook Marketplace and say, I have a pickup truck. I'll charge you $40 to pick up a mattress.
Yeah. Well, and you being the company that has the general manager and probably a lot more overhead than some of those smaller companies, it does probably make it ultra competitive to be able to compete on pricing for junk removal. So that's ultimately what's led you to transition more into the roll-off dumpster space.
Yeah, big time. I think a big thing for us has always been to the type of labor force. It's tough to employ folks, that have a clean driving record,
Yeah.
that make between 19 to 22 bucks an hour, um, and get them to a level of where their professionalism is at a point to where they can represent your business in a $2-3 million home, with big time realtors who have super high expectations, and that was always really tough. If you have a driver not show up for a day, if you have two drivers not show up for a day, that's 3,000-4,000 bucks in revenue for that day that isn't coming in. That's jobs you have to cancel. Customers are finding other places. Whereas what we found in roll-offs is the labor force, albeit it has its ups and downs and its quirks, but much more reliable and much more consistent. These folks make between 26 to $32 an hour. They have their CDL, so they have that kind of prerequisite of professionalism. That's a multiple week course. It's thousands of dollars out of pocket. So that barrier to entry for those drivers, gives them that professionalism to where when you sit down for an interview with a CDL driver, already that they have met a criteria that shows that they're relatively serious about their career and profession,
Mm.
Which is huge for us, and it's been huge for us the last couple of years getting into roll-offs. Like, I knock on wood, I can count on one hand, the amount of times our drivers on the roll-off side have called in.
Wow.
They want their hours, they want their overtime. Um, not to say it's always perfect and we don't have problems and we haven't had guys wreck trucks and those sorts of things, but uh, the initial headache of knowing they're going to show up, um, is something that's been huge for us. Because as a business owner, it allows me to focus on other things, right? Like I'm not stressed at 5 a.m. if a driver isn't showing up. Whereas like with junk removal, it was a daily thing,
Mm.
and I worked hard on culture and making it worth people's whiles and trying to build up a positive workplace for our team. It was really tough with junk removal.
Yeah.
And there are things I for sure could have done better, still can do better on the junk removal side to build a better culture. I've dealt with burnout that's impacted the business, but the roll off side, the labor force has been a real blessing for us.
Those first couple years, kind of before you were transitioning into the dumpster space, it sounds like there was a lot of lessons, probably a lot of mistakes as well. Um, I like the listener to just be able to kind of learn from a lot of those mistakes. So, what were some of those mistakes and lessons that you had?
Sure. Yeah. Well, to get was a lot. I need a whiteboard and
Yeah.
about 50 bulletin points. But I think the big thing is, for me, you get wrapped up into it so quickly. Where I started with the pickup truck. I'm making, way more money than I ever have ever. It's fun. I feel like I'm really learning, for the first time, probably, you know, for sure, like in my adult life, but also throughout, obviously, of course, I've always been learning, but I feel like, what I'm learning can be applied.
Mm.
Um, and there's very little time throughout, you know, the immediate hustle of it to take a step back and like say, like, is this the right thing for me? Like, do I know myself well enough to be able to do this day in and day out for days and, weeks and months and years on end?
Mm.
How deep in, am I comfortable getting into this? Um, it, so, that's like a struggle and something that I really wish, probably earlier on, way earlier on, that I had really like pondered. It's I don't know if burden's the right word, but it's a daily task owning and operating your own business. I
Mm.
don't care what day of the week it is. I don't care what time of day it is. Um, I would be lying if I told you that, you know, there was a time within the last, 5, 6 years that, a day went by where, there wasn't, at least a few hints of anxiety,
Mm.
around the business. I don't care if I'm, you know, out of town on vacation, out with friends socially. Um, and that's tough, and that's something that I wish earlier on I would have, reflected upon a little bit more. I wish I had sought out mentors a little bit more to kind of, remind me of those realities as an entrepreneur. And, you know, I've learned so much. I continue to learn so much, but, um, definitely in hindsight, first starting out, you know, you're so worried about losing a customer. You feel like you've worked so hard to get to where you are, and you don't want to let it slip. That you're scared to take a couple days, days off. Um, and that's part of the love and passion for it, right? That's part of working for yourself, part of the beauty of working for yourself, part of why my girlfriend lives in New York City. I can spend a lot of time there. I can work remotely, which is
Mm.
awesome in a lot of ways. But there's a lot of inconsistencies
Yeah.
and constant paranoia. I, if you watch Shark Tank, like like you hear him talk about, as an entrepreneur, if you're not paranoid, you're losing. All the best entrepreneurs are paranoid to an extent.
Yeah.
Um,
I feel like you have to be, but as you're saying too, and probably a mistake you made early on was just you didn't take the time to pour into yourself. You pour so much into the business to where it almost kind of consumes you to
yeah,
some extent. And if you let it consume you, then that burnout ultimately does happen. But I do really resonate with that, where once you have employees and you have a team, and you have a lot of people that rely on you, from customers to everybody else, you do feel this weight on your shoulders because it's no longer just about you. It's like, hey, if I make a mistake or if I can't make payroll this week, there's a lot of people that are going to be affected by that. And those people have families. I'm sure a lot of your employees have families and rent and
yeah. No, I mean, I feel like our reputation, like, that you start building from day one, is just like so fragile.
Mm.
Um, and it, like that's honestly like what gives me the most anxiety
Yeah.
of anything, probably. I would say that. And the finance money piece of it is huge too. Like, I do not have a finance background. I went to school for political science. I didn't know what I wanted to do until I was desperate for money, finding odd jobs on Craigslist. But very quickly, I'm having to you know do my own bookkeeping when we're just starting. I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
Yeah.
I still don't on that side very much. We lean heavily now on other people, and it's been very imperfect, over the course of our business, and it's really big things to think about and make sure are relatively sound before you start. Because if you start just putting your head down and just working, and you don't have your bookkeeping in order, you don't have a relatively clear outlook on how you want to approach it, for 6, 8, 12 months at a time, you're gonna burn out to a degree.
Yeah.
You can fight back from burnout. I have. But not only are you going to burn out, you're going to be in a place where your business isn't set up for the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 vehicles in my business, or whatever business you're in, can grow. When you're in bed thinking about, it was a great day, we're growing well, just like we've wanted, and like I always talk about and hope. But at the same time, our bookkeeping is disorganized as shit. You can't get loans if your bookkeeping sucks.
Yeah.
We raised outside capital, at one point, to get into the roll off, and dumpster game. That was a huge eye-opening experience for me. And since then, we've been able to really hone in on those systems and processes more. Because now we're in the dumpster and roll off space. It's hugely capital intensive, which is great for us on the sales side, because the barrier to entry is so high. It's a $300,000 truck, just to get into it. Pretty much each dumpster is like 5, 6 grand. So it's cash intensive.
Yeah.
Which is why we raised cash, 2-3 years ago. But yeah, point being, like, if you put your head down and just work like a maniac, and don't take a step back, you're in for a big wake up call once you start to feel that burnout and see that your books aren't in order. You can't really grow the business, because ultimately you do need cash.
Yeah.
I don't care what business you're in. You can pour in your profits back into the business, as much as you can, and but it's something to really think about, that I really encourage folks that I talk to today that are just starting out, get in the weeds with your books, make sure everything is, even if your books aren't great, make sure you have them so that you can show your progress in your year to year and how far you've come, or maybe you had a good stretch and then a bad stretch and then a good stretch, like we are having. So you can go to these financiers and say, hey, it's never been perfect, but we're still here 9 years later. We have a reputation to stand on. We've never missed a payment. Those sorts of things are so vital.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's kind of your experience with financing and the weeds in the solar space with that?
Yeah. So the nature of our business is very labor intensive. Now, with that being said, like, because solar is very technical, and does require certifications, and we have a master electrician on salary, the barrier to entry is still difficult. But what we do, so we specialize in detaching and resetting solar panels. So essentially what we do is we partner with about 25 to 30 roofing companies across Colorado. Anytime a roof needs to be replaced that has solar panels on it, we'll be the crew that comes out, removes the solar panels, the roofer does their work, and then we come back out on the back end and reinstall the solar. So very labor intensive. So financing hasn't been a huge hurdle for us. We do have credit lines with distributors and manufacturers and things along those lines when we do need materials.
Sure.
But it is something that I've been thinking about, as we want to grow and expand and bring more in-house operations. Right now I have about a 7-person team, but if I did want to expand, like you said, you need capital for that, and you need to know how to raise capital. So it's something to really think about as we want to grow. I think we really need to look at our books and, you know, um, and figure out not just from a like me perspective, like, okay, I have money in my bank account, I'm doing okay. But what would a financer say when they look at my books?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I'm still learning, what exactly financiers are looking for. We've had, you know, five, six, we've had upwards of $700,000 in our bank account, at one point. We've also had, $2,000, $3,000 in our business checking account before,
yeah,
and have had to borrow to make payroll.
yeah,
Um, and each of those times, we've gotten different answers from different financiers, whether it's a dealership, whether it's a bank, whether it's a private lender, uh, from friends and family. Yeah. So yeah, I still struggle with it. I still can't really wrap my head around, the finance side of it. And I find the less I focus on it and can, put it in the hands of folks, Parker, who I work with super closely now, my brother-in-law, he's doing an amazing job with that, to help that side of the business really be in a stable position. But the more I can focus, and stay in my lane, which is, sales and account management and being out and growing kind of the brand and base of the business, um, the happier I am, the better our business is ultimately. The
yeah,
happier our team is, the the sales just kind of comes in after that. If
yeah.
if I'm spending my time stressed about things that that I already know I'm shitty at, it's just so unproductive.
Yeah. So you mentioned that like one of the things that keeps you up at night is your reputation. And I really, really feel that. Like we're very, very Google review centric.
Us too.
Yeah, like I focus very, very heavily on it. Um, how how do you create a culture where your team cares just as much about your reputation as you do? Because I feel like that's hard to do. Like it's your baby, you've built it from the ground up. So you obviously care so much about the reputation, but you're not out at every job site. You're not able to be. You can't be 100 places at once.
Yeah.
So how have you created that culture?
Yeah. I mean, I've like I worked with a really close friend of mine, a childhood friend. His name's Josh Musler. Worked with him for about 2 years. He was, our CFO, kind of all hands on deck, kind of guy. But he has a finance background. Um, he really taught me a ton of like the professionalism that I still, carry myself with today in terms of how you communicate, professionally, which, I lacked initially. Like, I had no experience with like sending business emails or how to talk to your coworkers, professionally. Like, I didn't have experience with that. Like this was my first job, at a college. My previous other job, I worked at a summer camp, in college for a summer. Um, so what I've always found after, taking away some of those things from Josh is, you know, keeping the way you communicate with everyone on your team, as the same way that you communicate with your customers.
Hmm.
So really professional, really sound. Don't leave any room for error or for things to be misconstrued. Um, keep it kind and upbeat and positive.
Hmm.
Lead with a compliment. Those are things that Josh really instilled in me, and it's the way that I try and communicate now with all of my team and all of our customers, so that there's a level of mutual respect from the get-go that hopefully kind of progresses throughout your relationship with that person.
Hmm.
And if it doesn't, if you find consistently that someone on your team or a customer is constantly betraying that level of positive communication that you feel like you've instilled in your team and in your relationship with this individual, from the get-go, it might not be the right fit.
Yeah.
That's when we start to take a close look. Like we just fired someone on the roll-off side, one of our drivers,
Mm.
never missed a shift, worked his butt off, um, had like the best turn rate, of any of our drivers that we've ever had. But, slowly but surely, the longer he was with us, his communication and professionalism towards us, like internally, just went down the drain. And time again, we're giving him warnings about, his attitude, and the way he communicates with us.
Yeah.
It lost all professionalism. And, as soon as that goes, with an employee or with a customer, it's not worth it.
Yeah.
There's enough business out there. There's enough, people that can get behind the wheel of our trucks, to where, everyone deserves to be treated with, a base level, of kindness and respect. And we really try and approach all business relationships that we have, kind of through that lens. We're not perfect. We get bullied by customers all the time, believe me.
Yeah.
That's kind of the nature of the customer service business, though, in general, right?
Yeah.
So, where do you draw the line? It's never perfect, but I mean, we fired customers before.
Yeah.
We're not going to service you. This is demands this, not willing to pay, what we, strongly believe is a very fair rate. Those sorts of things are, we're constantly grappling with. But I would say, like, I found the more that we synchronize our communication and are all on the same page internally, that leads to strong external communication, being our online presence, reviews, text messages with customers, emails, those sorts of things.
Yeah. I love what you said, where you communicate with your employees the same way you communicate with customers. Because I think a lot of people will put on this mask almost the second a customer comes on the phone, and their whole demeanor changes and their tone of voice changes. But then the way they talk to their employees isn't that way. And so I think that's a really good perspective that a lot of people can learn from, is treat your employees the same way you would treat a customer. And if you treat both of them poorly, then you're probably not going to be in business very long. But you can hide it for a little while if you only speak to your customers in a certain way. But if you want to last a long time and be in business for 9 years, you've got to treat both similarly.
Yeah. It's hard. I mean, you work with a lot of realtors, right?
Yeah.
It's an interesting group of clientele to service, and that's I think part of what leads to my paranoia with that group of customers is because they are very cliquey. They're sometimes coming from like almost like a similar background to me, is like they don't have that corporate kind of professionalism that's broadly instilled, at a lot of larger institutions.
Yeah.
And
They can be a tough crowd.
yeah,
sometimes.
yeah. Just grappling with those personalities, it kind of makes me paranoid about,
Yeah.
what are they saying about us? What, and it ultimately leads to, you just wanted to have a better product.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So you were saying at one point in time you had 30, 35 employees. I think you even operated in other states or another state. Talk to me about scaling, what that looked like for you, and then ultimately why you scaled back.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I was kind of, I had just gotten out of my working relationship with Josh Musler, who I just referenced. In hindsight, definitely for the best for our friendship. We're still extremely close. to this day. But I think he struggled with my sometimes casual approach, to entrepreneurship and business. He's very, very disciplined, very routine oriented. I am to an extent, but I'm also like, I can roll with the punches pretty good. I've been an entrepreneur long enough to where like, I've seen and heard it all, and I'm pretty good at, like I said, rolling with the punches and not letting things like eat me up.
Yeah.
I guess, but I just gotten out of working with Josh, and I just felt pretty complacent in my professional life. My partner at the time, actually my ex-wife, was really pushing me to grow the business, expand. And in hindsight, I'm glad I did it. We were operating in Denver metro. We had a home base in Colorado Springs, and we were actually in Nashville, Tennessee as well. We had a customer essentially bring us out, to Nashville, who really wanted us to support them there. And I was, just kind of bored and complacent professionally, and was really excited by the opportunity to do it. We raised like a seed round, and kind of all at once got into the Colorado Springs market, got into Nashville, and had about 30, 35 employees. I then started working with another close friend of mine, childhood lifelong friend, Ben Tillis, and super bright, sharp finance guy. Had all of our projections, all of our modeling, built out. And I was going to Nashville, at least once a month, trying to get things going there really well. We're in Denver, where our biggest operation was. So we had like 5 trucks in Denver. We had like 1 truck in the Springs, and then 1 truck in Nashville. And that was just junk removal at the time.
Okay.
It was a crazy learning experience for sure. We had a super sound operation in Denver. That gave me a lot of confidence. But I think once we simultaneously got into roll-offs, because it was the junk removal expansion, and then it was getting into the dumpsters, that we kind of started to become pretty in over our heads. I looked at junk removal and dumpsters as if they were the same business way too much, I think, and that it would be very seamless because of that. And it really wasn't. It was a huge learning curve. I had not done enough preparation on the roll-off side to know what all we were getting into and the amount of focus and attention it was going to take away, all while we're trying to grow in other markets and continue to grow junk removal and have 30 people on payroll. I was super in over my head. And ultimately, burning through cash way too much. Our payroll's huge. We just spent $300,000 on a roll-off truck. We've got a $6,000 loan on it. The biggest loan for a vehicle I've ever had by far. We just bought 25 dumpsters. So it was just a lot, and all while simultaneously, I'm in a relationship that was ultimately not fruitful and beneficial to help the business or myself, first and foremost. And that was just kind of all came crashing down, to be honest.
Yeah.
And after about a year and a half, got out of Nashville, uh, got out of the Springs. We still, do a little bit of work there, but we don't have like a Google listing there or park a truck there. Um, and just came back to Denver, sold several trucks, and kind of came back to earth and was like, okay, in Denver, let's have a junk removal operation, let's have a roll off operation, and let's leave it at that, for now. And that's where we are today. Is you know like like 2-3 junk removal trucks in Denver. Um, we've got like 3 roll off trucks. Yeah, and the 90 plus dumpsters. And that is plenty right now.
Yeah.
I know that was long winded, but
Yeah. No, there's a lot you can learn from that. And I think a lot of businesses will go out of business because they starve. But there's also a lot of businesses that go out of business because they try to expand and grow too quickly.
yeah,
Um,
and we were fortunate. We should have gone out of business.
yeah.
We burned through. I mean, our payroll was insane. I was so set on like what our business plan was on paper and trying to see that come to life that I ignored and kind of just like pushed down the reality of how our financials were looking, and making changes earlier and pulling back sooner. Because we got bailed out. I got help, credit lines, or else we'd be out of business.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Talk to me about risk tolerance because I feel like, now you're kind of got to get into a lot of debt to own as much equipment as you guys own. Um, and not a lot of people have the risk tolerance for something like that. How did you develop that, or is that something that was already instilled in you?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I think, subconsciously it was instilled in me because I knew growing up, like, I always had a strong sense that like my dad, you know, had a lot on the line with his businesses, and seeing how he managed that and, still show up for me and for, our family so consistently. Um, I think just kind of slowly but surely gave me a lot of confidence that like, no matter what, you can figure it out. Um, that being said, you know, I don't know the right answer for how to gauge what your risk tolerance may or may not be.
Yeah.
It's an important, conversation to have with, partners, friends, family to uh, have a sense of that before you personally guarantee all your vehicles.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, risk tolerance to me um, is just kind of inevitable. I think at the end of the day, for me, like I feel very confident in who I am to where like if shit really did hit the fan and I needed to start all over, I could
Mm.
and I'd be fine. I think that's like at the brunt of it for me probably. Um, because I still today feel kind of stuck in where I am as a business owner in the sense that like I'm in very deep. I have several loans, right?
Mhm.
I've got obviously the employees that we have had for several years now. Some of who so it's not I don't feel confident in at all, and just like waking up one day and saying, "Oh, I'm not going to continue this anymore." And that pushes me to an extent. It gives me all the emotions, the full spectrum. It gets me excited. It motivates me. It also makes me, dread some days and some moments and some meetings. Um, I try and at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day, just to lead with gratitude as much as possible, right? Like you know you choose your own outcome. I
Yeah.
really believe that. Um, and you can approach a situation, good or bad, with a certain mindset, and that mindset, is going to dictate, you know, how you feel and your outcome ultimately of a certain situation. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's complex, and it goes over my head most of the time. That,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I'm sure you just continue to develop that risk tolerance over time. And, you start here and then it's like, okay, I have this confidence. Let's take it up a notch. Um, and I like what you said because I've been in business for less time than you, but I do really feel like with all of the lessons I'm learning that I am starting to get to this point to where I feel this confidence that if I lost it all or if my business tanked, which knock on wood that doesn't happen, but it is ultimately possible that I'm developing the skills and I'm just becoming the person that could do it over again and probably quicker and potentially even better.
yeah. I think about that all the time about like what my next business would look like if I started from scratch with a
Yeah.
completely different business. I think about that often, and like it honestly gets me excited, and it motivates me in my current business
Yeah.
because I love my business, and I want to do it for a really long time. I always want to have a hand in it. I think we can grow it to pretty exceptional places. But it also really excites me, to have a clean slate of a different business, and seeing how I would do that differently, and ultimately how much more success I could have at it in a
Yeah.
shorter period of time.
Yeah. It's a cool place to be as a business owner when you get to that point to where you have that confidence.
Yeah.
Um, so being a business owner is hard. There's so many different moving pieces. It seems like you've got a lot on your plate. Talk to me about time management and how you manage all of the different things you have to do on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm honestly not great at it. Like my schedule is way more fluid than it probably should be. I think one thing that is top two or three is movement. I gotta move my body. I gotta get if at least 5,000 steps a day. If I can get on a bike or into a workout class, uh, that's even better. So I would say that's super high up there. What I put in my body is probably top two or three also.
Yeah.
Um, those two things impact how I show up and spend my time, for myself, for my partner, for friends, family, and then for my business. And then, if those two things are aligned and, in a pretty good place, then I feel like I'm really honed in on, how I can spend my time. I'm showing up for my team, and making sure I'm getting the most out of them, right? Like if I am taking those steps for myself, I'm showing up way better for my team. That's for sure. Like
Hmm.
if if I'm not doing those things as consistently, our team is maybe spending time sitting around, um, waiting on their leader a little bit,
Yeah.
and that gives me anxiety. That's a good motivator for me. Uh, but like as far as like a daily regiment, like it really does vary. I would say on average I exercise around 1 or 2 o'clock every day.
Hmm.
Um, I try and be off my computer around like 5ish usually, uh, and then all morning, that's when I'm at my peak like energy to really get anything done. The last 2 3 hours of my day after I exercise is kind of just me like tying up some loose ends, but the morning is me meeting with people, meeting with our team, doing those higher intensity errands. I guess you'd call it, meeting customers. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
it's not rocket science for me, that's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. You've said this a couple times in the podcast, but I really like how you put a lot of emphasis on the personal. Like you can't show up for your team if you're not feeling your best. You can't show up for your team if you don't take time for yourself. And I think a lot of business owners really struggle with that. They
Oh
focus
yeah.
so much on the professional aspect, like, oh, I need to be better at sales or I need to be really good at marketing. But it's like, no, you just need to meditate. You need to pray. You need whatever it is, you need to um, take some time for yourself. And that's big for me. Like I always track when I have a good day, whether that's a good day in business or just a day where I'm happy
Hmm.
um, and there's consistent things. There's the gym.
Yeah.
For me, it's reading my Bible. There's certain things that I do consistently that just when I do them, I have a better day,
Hmm.
and I can't show up for my team if I don't do those things.
For sure.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
Oh, no, go ahead.
oh no, no, you're good.
No, I was just gonna say my girlfriend actually just started doing that same thing, that tracking of the day.
Yeah,
She tracks like her energy level. She tracks, what it was she did that day and how her sleep was, and those three things she tracks every day, at the end of the day. And it's really clear, what the patterns and signs become. And yeah.
yeah. So lot of ups and downs over the last
Yep.
9 years. What do you think got you through all of those hurdles? Like what mindset, what belief in yourself or in your business helped you get through all of the ups and downs?
Yeah. I mean, definitely my family,
Yeah.
I'm super close with, my family, my sister, parents, have really given me everything. I think that it really starts there.
Yeah.
Like they've saved my ass. They've enabled me to have the freedom to have unbelievable life experiences time and time again. Whether it's starting a business or uh, you know supporting me in relationships, and you know the the downfalls of those things, like just continuously lifted me up, I would say.
Mm.
And that's a huge motivating factor for me today too, is like, I would love nothing more, than to get to a point to where, it's me and my brother-in-law, who, Parker, who I work with now, you know, treating our family, on, to a vacation, or, to a sporting event. That's probably like, top 2, 3 motivator for me now, is, being able to have, my parents, around in good health,
Mm.
to see me have some of those successes. I think it'd be super satisfying, um, for all of us, but uh, yeah, I mean, it's hard to look anywhere else than them, for that
Yeah.
question, honestly.
Yeah.
I know it's kind of generic, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it sounds like it goes both ways. Like you were motivated because of your family, because you wanted to be able to do all these things with them, and to be able to provide abundance, to be able to do those things, but also the support. I think it's really important in business to have people that support you. They probably didn't understand. I mean, your dad did, but not all your family will understand the struggles and the stress that you're going through and that constant anxiety you talk about. Um, but they don't have to understand it to support you. My wife doesn't understand everything that I'm going through on a day-to-day basis, but it's a relief to know that she doesn't understand it, but she still supports it. And yeah, it's really important to have those people in your life.
Yeah, for sure. My mom often talks about the way that she supported my dad during his earlier days of business, and you know the difficulties, how long it took, and it took several years, but my dad ultimately, had a super successful business for a long time and ended up selling it. Um, so they're very steady, about their approach and communication with me. Stick with it. It's
Yeah.
it's going to turn. Keep your head down, um, and that is a nice force to have for sure
Yeah.
as I do this.
Yeah. What's next? What's next for the junk trunk? Do you have, goals? I know you're content right now. You're at a good place. You scaled it back. You're comfortable with where you're at. But I know any entrepreneur and you being a driven individual, there is something in the back of your mind where you want to take the company.
For sure. I mean, we're still in growth mode.
Yeah.
I can't approach a business any other way. I think I, it's hard to come across any entrepreneur that's not trying to grow their business in some way. So we're in growth mode. I mean, we're believe it or not, I'm out there, trying to raise more capital, to get more dumpsters. Each dumpster, like I said, is 5-6 grand a piece. Um, you need dumpsters in this space, and you need trucks. So I'm working on those relationships to get more capital. We're a small business, so banks are only willing to give you so much money. Dealerships are only willing to give you so much money. So we're getting creative with our approach to it, but we want to get to, I think 250 to 300
Mm.
dumpsters, 7, 8, 9 trucks, on the dumpster side is really, kind of our bigger, broader goals right now. We feel like that's at a, that gets our business to a place that gives us a ton of options. One, we're cash flowing at that place super nicely. Um, we're a very attractive business for some of our largest competitors at that point.
Mm.
Uh, and ultimately just gives us options. We can say, hey, we're making good salaries right now. Do we want to keep this thing going? Do we want to keep buying new equipment? You always got to buy new equipment. It wears and tears, and you need new stuff. Do you want to keep dealing with those things, in the day to day, or do you want to turn the page and go do something else? Hopefully, we get to that point, right?
Yeah.
Where we have options. For me personally, I think we can get to that 250, 350 dumpster mark, and probably realistically like another 2 or 3 years,
Yeah.
um, and have those options, and I look forward to that day.
Yeah.
It's too early to speculate on like what I would or wouldn't do. I'd love to have another business. Like my buddy and I started a sandwich shop,
Cool.
a couple summers ago, and actually, saw some pretty quick success from it and had a blast doing it. I think we both love to, maybe do something like that again.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately, I think we can get the business to a great place to where we're growing consistently and can hold on to the business for a long time.
Yeah.
I think that is most realistic. And I feel like we're trending in the right direction. Although some days it feels like you're taking, you know, one step forward, and then the next day you're taking, 6, 7 steps back.
Yeah.
So just trying to stack those good days as much as many as you can in a row. It is huge for us entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah. Well, Nathan, I have no doubt it's gonna happen, man. It's coming. I can just tell you, you're gonna make it happen. And I talk about this on my podcast often, but you can really tell when somebody says something and they're actually gonna accomplish it. Um, yeah, and I can just see that with you. I always like to end my podcast with a question similar to this. But if you could give one piece of advice to somebody that's got a Ford pickup truck, it's 18, 20 years old, and they want to start a business, what's that one piece of advice you'd give them?
Well, like I said, I need another whiteboard for how much, in hindsight, you could tell, my older self. I would probably say find a, really spend time, in your day to day in between, the hustle of you trying to grow your business, to find someone who's got, at least 5 or 7 more years of professional experience than you have, and try and, build a mentorship relationship with them so that, you know, as you continue to grow and expand your business, you have someone that you can really look up to. That, I encourage people not to have like their primary mentor be someone who's, any more than like, I would say 10 years older than them,
Mm,
honestly, because what I found with people, 10 plus years older than me some of the time, and not all the time, but is that, there's like an element of how stuck in their ways they get, that like there's just like this shield up, and they can't look past how they've had their own success, and that it has to be done that way. And like I said, that's not everyone. Not everyone's like that. And I think having a wide range of mentors is great. Whether it's someone who's 5 to 10 years older than you, or 30 years older than you. I think both, have their positives. But I think like your primary mentor should be someone who is like relatively in your age range, just so they can understand you more on a personal level too, right? Like, my dad, who's, my biggest supporter, biggest mentor. There's a lot of things, as he's a 6-year-old. I'm a 30-year-old. He doesn't get it some of the time, and like, there's shields up of people sometimes, to where like, I've now been able to take up certain mentors that are like, and 35 to 40,
mm,
and they can see through your lens a lot clearer, I think. I would really encourage, my 18-year-old self, an 18-year-old in a similar position, to find someone that they can try and lean on, join networking groups, put yourself out there, and a mentor like that will fall into your lap easier than it sounds like.
mm.
It can sound big and scary, especially when you're 18, but I would say put yourself out there, find someone that you can lean on that's, 5, 10 years older than you, and has some applicable experience, and shoot all your ideas off them. And whether it's personal or business, uh, look to them as someone you can really, um, lean on
Yeah.
as tough decisions come up, right? Like I remember when I first started, like 3 to 6 months in, all the time, I was working, 15, 16-hour days some of the time, all said and done. And at the end of it, I was just like, but what's next? Like, am I going to keep doing this? And before I had time to even think, I was asleep and doing it all again, the next day. And you got to allocate some time off to have some reflection when you're first starting, or else you'll end up deep. And it's not the worst thing if you do, but it's, you can limit yourself that way.
Yeah. Well, that's great advice, Nathan. And like I said, man, it's been incredible to learn from you. And I'm really excited to see where you take the junk trunk, and potentially a sandwich shop in the future. Yeah, man. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. This is awesome, man.